Hey everyone, Genome here with the next episode of Was It Good? Today, I'm going all the way back to 1982 for the release of what many consider one of the finest instances of high fantasy ever released on film. Of course, I'm talking about none other than The Dark Crystal.
Their treasure, their fate, the Dark Crystal.
I was kind of inspired by this, not only liking the movie from way back when, and seeing it in theaters too, also by something that came in a loot crate a few boxes ago, and that was this Dark Crystal kind of making of book, which was just incredible. It's just really good, a lot of lore and history back in there, and definitely worth checking it out if you got that loot crate. But I mean, a lot of movies are just inherently worthy of a video, and this one will, of course, be no less. This movie was directed by Jim Henson and co-directed by Frank Oz, so you might remember him from Star Wars, with primary concept artistry done by Brian Froud. So this movie is really revolutionary in the fact that other than one distant shot and you see the back of the character, there's no actual visible humans in this movie, which is just, it's incredible considering the amount of activity they'll have on screen at one time and things that are going on in, say, crowded rooms. There's none. There's no humans seen in this movie, so that is an amazing feat of artistry there. Of course, you probably wouldn't expect anything less from Jim Henson, you know, the man who brought you the Muppets. Later on after this, he had Labyrinth come to you. So yeah, he was very good at designing puppets that looked like great standalone pieces, and just a lot of his puppets didn't look like puppets. So they could get away with things like not having actual physical humans in there. So while that aspect is one of the movie's greatest strengths, it's also something of an inherent weakness, just because of the rather clunky and cumbersome movements of the puppets, especially considering the animatronics at the time. Now, don't get me wrong, what they did with these puppets is just, it's mind-boggling how well it was done. The creature design is just top-notch. I know that they went in with a specific, shall we say, mantra of to make these creatures look nothing like something we had here on Earth. In fact, some of the earliest designs for the Skeksis, the bad guys in this movie, were actually modeled on deep sea designs, but until they were later on blended into more of a bird-reptile hybrid. But yeah, just the character design, creatures design is really, it's just incredible, and really I won't say only, but definitely the biggest reason to watch this movie. Now I'll get out there and be honest with you, as far as a story goes and as a film goes, it's okay. It's actually a little bit bland. I mean, it's a typical, you know, Joseph Campbell-in hero's progression, where the hero, you know, goes through trials and tribulations and finally winds up, you know, winning the day, which is done in a good way because it's done through sacrifice, you know. So Jim got that part right, that's for sure. But story and all that is kind of a weaker element of this movie. It's not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but it's just not, it's not the reason you watch this movie. You watch this movie for the effects. Now getting to the effects, let's talk about just the incredible accomplishment that this movie was able to achieve, especially considering the technology at the time. You know, there's no CGI back then. If you wanted something going on, you had to make a practical effect or rotoscope it. But this movie just relies on puppets, basically puppets, and incredibly detailed backdrops and scenery and set design. So, upon watching this movie, at the first time you watch it, you'll just notice the big characters, you know, the ones that pop out you know, Jen and the Skeksis and the Mystics, the Gartham, that sort of thing. But what I really find fascinating about this movie is the backgrounds. And if you look at basically any shot in this movie, there is always something going on in the background. There's some little piece that's moving. Looks like little animals that are scurrying all over the place in the backdrops, and plants that are growing and shrinking with like winds and that sort of thing, or you can picture them feeding. There's just always something going on, and they didn't even need to do it to make such an immersive kind of story. But the fact that he had that much care for his craft, it comes through in every frame in this movie. Lighting is top-notch, sound is good. I like most of the creature noises. Now let's talk about the creatures. You have basically 3, maybe 4, if you include the podlings, but I won't. Basically 3 different types of races that are protagonists in this movie. The main hero is Jen, and he's a gelfling. So basically he's like a miniature elf, basically, maybe between an elf and a fairy or sprite, which you'll see later with his girlfriend. So he's more of a completely separate entity. And then you get down to the Mystics and the Skeksis. All right, the Mystics are the good guys. The Skeksis are the bad guys. At least in their motivations, you can tell. The Mystics are very peaceful, very shamanistic and ritualized.
The race of mystics came to live in a dream of peace. Their ways were the gentle ways of natural wizards.
And they just want to live in their little enclave and really not be pestered, and just to, keep their traditions alive.
Yet now there are only 10. A dying race, numbly rehearsing the ancient ways in a blur of forgetfulness. But today...
The Skeksis, on the other hand, are basically their polar opposites. They're conquerors.
Here in the Castle of the Crystal, the Skeksis took control.
They're petty, they're jealous, they're always vying for power. They struggle amongst themselves in their own hierarchy.
The Skeksis with their hard and twisted bodies, their harsh and twisted wills.
And this comes from how they were made. Because basically at one time, before the crystal cracked, the Mystics and the Skeksis were one race, and they split. So basically you had the light half, which was the Mystics, and the dark half, which were the Skeksis. So they basically took all the positive traits and put them in one race, and all the negative traits and put them in another one. Well, being that the Mystics were good and altruistic, and they had no interest in power or that sort of thing, they just kind of stayed off to the side. And the Skeksis quickly took over the planet and enslaved everything around them. But, millennia go by, and both races are dying out. And with a nice touch, you can see that every Mystic and every Skeksis is tied in together. So if one of them dies, for instance, the Mystic leader dies towards the beginning of the movie, just out of old age or infirmity or some sort of disease, it doesn't say which, it's his counterpart, the leader of the Skeksis, also dies. So it's a nice way of showing how interconnected they are, even though they're completely split and different. In regards to the world itself, they're still one. Later on in the movie, one of the Skeksis gets pushed into like a flame pit, and he just, incinerates. And the same exact thing happens to a Mystic who's just walking his way toward the castle. He just incinerates as well. So they're completely inexorably tied into each other because they used to be one race. So that's a great little touch. The Mystics are, I don't know how you would describe them, but they got 2 legs and 4 arms and long tails. Looks like a cross between maybe a Brachiosaurus or Brontosaurus, a Apatosaurus, whatever you want to call them. Some sort of dinosaurid there, and a horse. They got the long face and the manes that come down, but they're very peaceful and laconic, and just incredibly well-designed creatures. And apparently they were very difficult to operate because of their design and their posturing. Or they're kind of set up more like a quadrupedal kind of animal, you know. So basically they're completely hunched over. So and they're big heavy costumes, and it was just a real chore to operate them, but they're just brought around with amazing care. You don't see nearly as much of them in this movie as you do the Skeksis. Now the Skeksis, who are my personal favorite creatures in all of fantasy, are, I would say, a cross between a crocodilian and a vulture. You know, they look kind of a cross between birds and reptiles. And they're decadent, you know, they're dressed in these rich brocaded robes, and they're always gorging at these giant feasts. But you can see the decay that's going on. You know, they're old and they're shriveled. Their garments are kind of rended a little bit and ratty looking, even though they were once opulent. Their dining hall is kind of falling apart and dirty. So you can kind of see the decay that's just inherent with them, and how things are falling apart since the crystal is no longer whole. There's like the smallest shard missing from the crystal. That's the whole crux of this movie, is bringing this little shard. Looks like the one Superman used in his Fortress of Solitude in the original. About that same size, but that's caused this world to start dying, you know. And the Skeksis seems to have hastened the planet's demise. You know, everything they do is a drain. You know, they drain other beings' life essence to stay younger and rejuvenate themselves. It looks like they draw energy from the planet to power their creations. So basically they're just a great giant void.
For this is the way of the Skeksis. As they ravage the land, so too they learn to draw new life from the sun. Today, once more, they will replenish themselves, cheat death again.
That's sucking up all the life on the planet. But their design is just extraordinary. Each of them has a different personality. Each one has specific adornments that coincide with their personality. Like there's a scientist one, and he has this little bits of tech all over him, and little skulls and that sort of thing. The Chamberlain, he's very, I don't know, you can think of him as like an old aristocrat. He's got the big, puffy, voluminous, the sleeve, the cuffs, and the collar and all that. And he's probably the puppet with the most screen time in this movie. He's the one that goes, you know, all the time, his whimper.
I hate your whimper. Quiet!
But the Skeksis were actually originally modeled after the 7 deadly sins. You know, you got your gluttony and envy and all that. And while there's 10 Skeksis, so some of them had to be doubled, that was the whole premise behind them. So if I could say one thing about the Skeksis, is they're just appetite. They want more. They want more power. They want more food. They want more youth. They don't want to give back. They just want to take, you know, and which is the complete opposite of the Mystics, who all they want to do is stay in harmony and give and be gentle and kind. So, but you know, Skeksis are just amazing creatures. Of particular note is the banquet scene.
Roast snappery, my favorite. I want the rare.
When they have all of them on camera at one time, it is just incredible. You know, the amount of detail on the walls, the table, along with the animatronics that are going on simultaneously is just, it almost boggles the mind. And it makes you wonder how many takes that they had to go through to get it right, because I'm sure it was a monumental amount. And it's not like, you know, characters who are just dressed up in a costume. This is people, multiple people working on the same puppet, you know, getting everything just right and just so. And
bad at all.
You know what a perfectionist Jim had to have been about that sort of thing, given his extensive experience in puppeteering. So, yeah, that aspect is just amazing. Some other smaller creatures are like the land striders, who look like a cross between, I don't know, a daddy long legs and a catfish, or a kangaroo and a catfish or something. I don't know what they even look like, but their heads look like catfish to me. You have the Gartham. They are, I always consider them like a crab. They look like a crab. They're like the foot soldiers for the Skeksis. Just black crab-like creatures. I remember them scaring me pretty good when I was like 5 or 6 when I saw this movie. And well, actually the one that scared me the most though was Aughra. Aughra was the, I don't know what she is. She's a mix between like a troll and the old, like the paganistic goat, you know, the demigod, whatever, with the horns in the head. And she has this one eye, and she can remove the eye and set it around like a remote camera. It's just interesting design. I remember not liking her much when I was a kid, but they have this really cool room. Her lair, as it is, it's nothing but a giant. It's basically, remember those old solar systems you used to build in science class, but there's different planets around on the wires and all that. Well, she has like a completely motorized version of their little portion of the galaxy. All done out with metal. It's in constant motion, supposedly with the movement of the heavens. So, yeah, it's just incredible set design as well. So as I said before, you know, none of the characters outside of maybe the Chamberlain Skeksi, the main Skeksi who is banished, and Jen, you don't see a whole lot of character development from basically any other the characters in this movie. And I guess they don't really need them to. I mean, there's a lot of different characters to go through, and a lot of long journey segments for Jen. So maybe all the stuff's not really needed. You know, I won't spoil the ending for you. I'll let you watch it for yourself. But you know, Jen goes through some tribulations, and his friends do, and in keeping with the darker tone of this movie, there's some death involved too, which is kind of surprising for a Jim Henson production. But you know, I mean, the movie's better for it. So the Skeksis really aren't these comical, buffoonish bad guys. They're just pure evil. And, you know, this is the kind of evil who is evil for evil's sake, and they don't really feel like they're doing anything wrong. They just consider it their due, like how they sap the life force out of other organisms and life forms, like the little podlings. They use the podlings as basically battery recharges. They suck their essence out, it turns into a juice, they drink it, they turn young temporarily. But it doesn't last. It doesn't last very long at all. But they have no problem doing that to these poor little creatures, and then taking the burnout husks that are left over and just making them, you know, slave labor. That's all they are to them. They're just means to an end. And apparently, Jen's race, the Gelflings, were prophesized to heal the land, to repair the crystal. So the Skeksis are completely paranoid about them. They try to completely annihilate them and genocide them. So there's only basically 2 remaining, Jen and someone you'll meet a little bit later in the movie. I won't ruin that for you either. But so they did the same amount of life force extraction to them right before they offed them, and it lasted longer with them. So they also crave the Gelflings to come back for that. But anyway, that's getting a little away from things. So is the Dark Crystal good? Well, I will say it is not good. It's great, but with a caveat. The story is serviceable. It's not great. I'd say the story itself is good, fair to good, but the effects and the world that Jim Henson built is just, it's extraordinary. You know, there's too many people to name between Frank Oz and Brian Froud and everyone else who was part of development in this movie, but it's just, it's a visual tour de force, and you are no fan of fantasy or geekdom or any of those kind of things like the high fantasy genre, if you haven't seen this movie. And there's no reason not to see this movie. While it can drag a little bit, there's so much for the eyes to feast themselves upon. It's a lot of the slower and weaker parts of the story are easy to overlook just by watching what's going on, you know. So I will say this movie is great. It is a great piece of 80s nostalgia that holds up fairly well. You know, a lot of people who are completely into, you know, CGI, magic and fireworks and great amount of action and character interactions, you know, fights and that sort of thing, might not care for this movie. People who are more interested in explosions and they don't care about characters too much and the idea behind characters may not like this movie. But for basically everyone else, there's something here for you, you know. It is worth watching. You can almost watch this movie on mute, you know, just turn the music off and it's still a good movie just because of the incredible splendor of the visuals. So yes, I wholeheartedly recommend it. Go see it. It's even worth a buy. I don't usually say to buy movies or any other kind of entertainment medium, but if you find it like in the used bin or the cheap DVD bin, or you want to download it on like Vudu or Hulu or something like that, you know, I don't think it's on Netflix, but just go see it. If you haven't seen it yet, just go see it. Keep an open mind and just revel in the amount of care and work that went into both the creature design, execution, and other things, just like the backdrops and the set designs. So do not pass go, do not collect $200, just go out and see this movie. And let me know what you think about it down in the comments, whether you like it or dislike it, and what part of it you liked or disliked. I appreciate y'all taking the time to watch this rather long-winded review, but this is once again another big part of my childhood, and while I didn't buy the movie again until, oh my gosh, I was probably in the late 90s. This is when I got it again in VHS, you know. So I hadn't seen it in almost 20 years at that point. It's just a great piece of nostalgia for me, and it's one that I think that you can get behind now without feeling too incredibly dated, like some things would. Like for instance, like a Buck Rogers or something, you know, something it was a good show in its time, but maybe hasn't aged all that well, especially from a visual standpoint. This movie is going to be ageless because of the practical effects and just how good the puppeteering and the actual design of the puppets are. So once again, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you would, leave me a comment down below, once again, on whether you liked the movie or whether you thought my dissertation was good, bad, or if you're indifferent, whatever. But in any case, share it if you can. And I'll be back with you later on in the week with my next episode of Was It Good? Well, in the meantime, you have a movie to go watch. So go find the Dark Crystal, get some popcorn, a soda, put your feet up, and enjoy the movie. Until next time, this is Genome, out.